What would you do if the people you saved every day turned into the very monsters that tried to break you? This is the story of a nurse whose courage became her weapon, whose kindness was repaid with cruelty, and whose revenge was served with nothing but the splintered leg of a broken chair. Stay until the end, because you won't believe how this tale unfolds, and if you like stories of resilience, shocking twists, and raw survival, make sure you subscribe for more. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and fear, not because the patients were dying, though many were, but because the city outside had decayed into something darker, meaner, more vicious than anyone imagined. Gangs ran wild. Young men with nothing to lose stalked the weak, and even inside the supposedly safe walls of the hospital, chaos spilled in with bloodied fists and broken bones, and standing at the front lines of it all was Lena, a nurse who had patched up drug addicts, murderers, and even the very bullies who would one day turn against her. She had grown used to insults, the sneers of those who thought nurses were little more than servants, but nothing prepared her for the night the power went out, the generator failed, and the emergency ward was left in flickering candlelight while shadows danced along the walls like devils waiting for permission to strike. That was when the gang entered. 4 boys, barely men, high on adrenaline and ego, each with scars they wore like medals, led by a hulking brute named Rafe whose fists were said to have killed a man without a blade or bullet. They weren't there for help, not really. They came swaggering in, pushing patients aside, demanding supplies they didn't deserve, screaming that the world owed them something. Lena, exhausted but unbroken, stood her ground, telling them no, that the medicine was for the sick, that the bandages weren't theirs to take. Her voice was calm but firm, the way she spoke to overdosing addicts in the but these weren't people looking for healing, they were looking for someone to crush. Rafe smirked, as if amused by her courage, then shoved her so hard she stumbled against a chair, the wood creaking under the impact, and when she stood back up to block him again, one of his friends swung a fist, catching her in the ribs and knocking her down. Gasps filled the ward, patients too weak to intervene, doctors too terrified to step forward, and Lena's body hit the floor with a dull crack as the chair she had struck collapsed, splintering into pieces. They laughed at her, pointing, mocking, asking if she still wanted to play hero. But as Lena lay there, her chest aching, her breath shallow, her hand brushed against something sharp, one of the chair's broken legs, jagged at the end, heavy enough to wield. She could have stayed down, she could have let the bullies strip the ward bare, but something primal surged inside her, something that had been buried under years of bandaging wounds, of staying quiet, of enduring disrespect from patients, bosses, and even strangers on the street. She remembered the stories her grandmother told of wolves, how sometimes, when cornered, even the smallest one bares its teeth. So Lena got up, slowly, painfully, every muscle screaming at her to stop, but she stood tall, the broken chair leg gripped in her hand, and for the first time, her eyes weren't those of a nurse but of a warrior who refused to be crushed. The gang laughed again, thinking she looked ridiculous, a nurse with a piece of furniture pretending to be a fighter, but they didn't realize the truth, that desperation is sharper than any blade, that when someone has nothing left to lose, they become unstoppable. With a sudden scream, Lena swung the chair leg at the nearest thug, the jagged wood slamming into his arm with a crack so loud the whole room froze. He dropped with a howl, clutching a bone bent the wrong way. Shock rippled through the gang. Rafe growled, stepping forward like a lion ready to kill, but Lena wasn't backing down. She swung again, this time across his face, splitting his lip, and the sight of blood dripping from the feared leader's mouth silenced every taunt. For the first time, someone had dared to fight back. But this was just the beginning. The fight turned savage, the ward becoming a battlefield, beds overturned, trays clattered, patients screamed. Lena ducked under a punch, jammed the chair leg into another thug's gut, sending him retching to the floor. She felt every nerve alight with fire, every ounce of fear transforming into rage. Yet just when it seemed she might win, Rafe caught her wrist, twisting it until she thought it might snap, his eyes promising murder. "You should have stayed down," he hissed, his breath foul, his strength crushing. For a moment, her vision blurred, black spots dancing as her grip faltered. But then she remembered the boy in the corner bed, a cancer patient barely 12, watching her with wide terrified eyes. If she gave up, what would he learn? That bullies always win. No, she couldn't let that be his lesson. With a roar, she slammed her forehead into Rafe's nose, feeling the sickening crunch as blood gushed, his grip loosening just enough for her to wrench free. She swung again, this time at his temple, the jagged wood cutting deep, and Rafe collapsed like a toppled statue. Silence fell, thick, suffocating, broken only by Lena's ragged breathing. The other thugs, seeing their leader down, staggered back, fear replacing arrogance. One dragged his broken-armed friend toward the door, another stumbled after them, leaving Rafe groaning on the ground. Lena, chest heaving, dropped the bloodied chair leg, her hands trembling not from weakness but from the shock of what she had just done. Around her, the patients began to clap, timid at first, then louder, their gratitude filling the air like a hymn. The doctors emerged from hiding, their faces pale, ashamed that a nurse had done what they hadn't dared. And Lena, despite her bruises, despite the taste of blood in her mouth, stood taller than ever before, not just a nurse anymore but a symbol. Word spread quickly. By morning, the city whispered of the nurse who fought back, who turned a broken chair into a weapon and sent a gang running. But the story didn't end there. Rafe, humiliated, vowed revenge. From his hospital bed, his nose reset, his temple stitched, he swore Lena would pay. And he wasn't alone. His gang regrouped, angry, thirsting for blood. Days later, they stormed the hospital again, this time armed with knives. Yet they weren't expecting what they found, because Lena had changed. She had trained, every free moment spent sharpening her strength, learning how to turn everyday objects into weapons. The janitor had taught her how to swing a mop like a staff, an old war veteran patient had shown her how to move, to strike, to survive. When the gang burst in, thinking they'd crush her, they met a different Lena, one who didn't just fight back but fought smart. She used fire extinguishers as blinding smokescreens, bedpans as shields, IV poles as spears. One by one, they fell again, humiliated, until Rafe himself lay defeated once more, his spirit broken. This time, Lena didn't just walk away, she dragged him to the police, her testimony ironclad, her courage undeniable. The city finally took notice, the hospital finally respected her, and the people who once overlooked her saw her as a hero. But Lena knew the truth. She wasn't a hero, not in the way stories painted them. She was just a woman who refused to stay down, who turned brokenness into strength. And deep inside, she realized something chilling. That sometimes, to fight monsters, you have to become one yourself, if only for a moment.